John believed the most dangerous beast he faced that night was the approaching deadline he was fleeing from. He was wrong. A far more patient predator was waiting in the storm, and he willingly opened his car door and let it in. The deadline was a beast with iron teeth and an insatiable appetite for time. It had been chewing on John's life for 3 weeks, and tonight it was swallowing the last of it whole. 1:37 a.m. The numbers on the dashboard of his hatchback glowed a malevolent red. A final insult after 14 hours spent hunched over architectural plans for a shopping mall that looked, to his exhausted eyes, like every other shopping mall ever conceived. His own personal monument to mediocrity. Outside, the world was ending in a flood. Not a gentle spring shower, but a percussive, violent onslaught of water that hammered the roof, gushed across the windshield in blinding sheets, and turned the lonely 2-lane blacktop of Ridge Road into a churning river. The wipers, thrashing at their highest setting, were losing the battle. John squinted, leaning forward, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He hated this shortcut, a winding back road that shaved 10 minutes off of his commute, but always felt strange at night. The ancient, gnarled oaks clawed at the edges of the road. Tonight, they seemed to be leaning in, whispering dark encouragement to the storm. He was thinking about his bed, about the blissful moment of surrender, the blessed oblivion of sleep. He was so lost in the fantasy that he almost missed her. A suggestion of something moving at the edge of the headlight beams. John's foot flinched on the accelerator. He slowed, straining his neck to try and see what it was. There, standing on the sodden shoulder where the asphalt crumbled into mud, was a woman. She wasn't trying to flag him down. She wasn't huddled against the deluge or shielding her face. She was simply standing, perfectly still, as if the torrential downpour was a minor inconvenience she'd chosen to ignore. The water plastered her thin dress to her frame, streamed down her face, and from the ends of her long, dark hair. She seemed a part of the storm, a figure sculpted from rain and shadow. Every instinct, honed by years of city living and a healthy dose of cynicism, implored him to drive on. Don't stop. Don't make eye contact. She's a ghost, a psycho, a trap. The stories were legion. Modern folk tales of roadside good Samaritans who ended up in ditches. But he couldn't. He was an architect. He built things to shelter people. The thought of leaving her out here, in this liquid chaos, felt like a fundamental betrayal of his own nature. Besides, he was exhausted, and exhaustion bred a strange, fatalistic brand of compassion. With a sigh that surrendered to his better angels, or perhaps his greater fools, John pulled the car onto the shoulder, the tyres sinking into the soft mud with a squelch. He leaned across the passenger seat and pushed the door open. A gust of wind and spray immediately invading the warm, dry cocoon of the car. "Hey, you need a ride?" he yelled over the roar of the storm. She didn't respond at first. She just turned her head, a laboured motion that seemed to take an age. In the dim, flashing glow of the hazard lights, her face was unnervingly pale, her eyes large and dark, and seemingly depthless. She looked at him not with gratitude or desperation, but with a kind of placid assessment, as if he were a taxi she'd been patiently waiting for. Then she moved. She didn't hurry. She glided towards the car with an eerie grace, her bare feet making no sound on the flooded asphalt. She slid into the passenger seat and pulled the door shut. The sound a dull thud that seemed to seal them in, separating them from the rest of the world. A silence descended, broken only by the frantic slap of the wipers and the drumming of the rain. A puddle was already forming around her feet on the rubber mat. She smelled of rain, yes, but also of something John couldn't quite put his finger on. That smell you get sometimes when it starts to rain. Wet earth. He shivered slightly, not from the cold, but from a lingering sense of unease that was beginning to overcome him. "Thanks," she said. Her voice was soft, melodic, but held a peculiar flatness, like a note played without any vibrato. "No problem," John managed, his throat suddenly dry. "Bit of a rough night to be out for a walk." She didn't answer. She just stared ahead into the thrashing darkness. He noticed she wasn't shivering. Her skin, though drenched and ghostly pale, was perfectly still. Goosebumps prickled on his own arms, but she seemed immune to the cold. "I'm John," he said, forcing a note of cheerfulness he was far from feeling. "I know," she whispered. John's hands tightened on the wheel. He chalked it up to the storm, a misheard word. "Sorry?" She turned her head to look at him again. Her eyes were like dark pools of water, and for a terrifying second, he felt like he was falling into them. "I know your name." "Okay," John said slowly, putting the car into drive and easing back onto the road. He was trying desperately to remember if he'd met her somewhere. Perhaps she was an ex-client, or someone he used to go to school with. No, he would have remembered that face. He would have definitely remembered that face. "Where are you headed?" he asked, his voice strained. "I can drop you anywhere in town." "Just drive," she said, her gaze returning to the windshield. "I'll tell you when to stop." The next few miles passed in a thick, humming tension. John kept shooting glances at her. Her simple, almost old-fashioned cotton dress was a light, indeterminate colour. No purse, no phone, no keys. Her hands rested in her lap, with her fingers long and white. Her nails spotlessly clean. It was impossible. She'd been standing in the mud. He tried to distract himself, reaching for the radio dial. He clicked it on, hoping for the familiar drone of a late-night talk show, for any other human voice other than hers. It crackled loudly, but then distant music started to play. It was a lullaby, an old one he half remembered from childhood, but it was warped and distorted, as if being played on a waterlogged gramophone. He quickly turned it off. "You're worried about the trusses on the North Corridor," she said, her voice cutting through the awkward silence. John's blood went cold. "What?" "The shopping mall," she clarified, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. "The load-bearing calculations are off by a factor of 0.2. It's a small mistake, but foundationally significant." He slammed on the brakes. The car skidded on the slick asphalt, the back end fishtailing, before coming to a stop in the middle of the empty road. He stared at her, but his mouth struggled to form any words. "How could you possibly know that?" he whispered. The trust calculation was the very thing that had kept him at the office until 1:30 a.m. It kept nagging away at him. As if he got it wrong, it could be disastrous. He hadn't told the soul. She just offered a small, sad smile. "There are some things you just know when you have enough time to listen." "Listen to what?" John demanded, his voice trembling. "The water," she said. "It remembers everything." He saw it then, a detail he'd missed. The rain streaming down the passenger side window wasn't just running down. In the erratic flashes of lightning that now split the sky, he could see tiny rivulets of it defying gravity, snaking upwards, tracing patterns on the glass before disappearing. He blinked and shook his head. He'd been struggling to sleep lately. It must have just been a symptom of exhaustion creeping up on him. "Look, I don't know who you are or what kind of game you're playing," he said, his voice harder now, fueled by a rising panic. "But I've had a very long day." "You have," she agreed softly, her gaze sympathetic. "You work too hard. Your mother used to say so." "My mother is dead," he snapped. "I know," she said, her tone gentle, soothing. "She misses you. She doesn't like that you don't visit her grave as often as you should." John began to feel the indescribable feeling of dread in the pit of his stomach. This was impossible. This was insane. He was having a psychotic break on a deserted road in the middle of a thunderstorm. It was the only explanation that made any sense. He put the car back in gear and drove, his foot pressing down hard on the accelerator. He didn't care about the speed or the treacherous conditions. He just had to find somewhere close to drop her off, to get to the lights of town, to civilization, to sanity. They passed a house set far back from the road, a grand old Victorian that was mostly derelict. As they sped past, she murmured, "Such a shame. The water got into the foundation 30 years ago. It's been sinking ever since, inch by inch." It was a detail an architect would notice, a fact he might have known had he ever stopped to study the building. But she saw it in a split second, in the dead of night, through a curtain of rain. The car's electronics went haywire. The dashboard lights flickered and died, plunging them into near total darkness, save for the headlights. The GPS screen flared to life, showing their location as a blinking dot in the centre of Dayton Reservoir, a body of water 3 miles to the north. Then it went dead. "Here," she said calmly. "You can stop here." John looked around wildly. They were nowhere. Just another stretch of dark road, the woods encroaching on either side. There were no houses, no lights, not even a driveway. "Here?" he asked, his voice a squeak. "There's nothing here." "This is the place," she insisted. He pulled over, the car shuddering to a stop. He wouldn't get out. He wouldn't let her out. He was going to drive straight to the police station. He turned to tell her this, to tell her the ride was over one way or another, but she was already opening the door. "Thank you, John," she said, her voice imbued with a profound and ancient sorrow. "You were very kind." She stepped out into the storm, but she didn't walk away. After a moment, she turned and faced the woods, and then she began to walk directly into the tree line. She didn't push branches aside or stumble on the uneven ground. She simply faded away. One moment she was there, a pale figure against the trees, and the next she was gone, absorbed by the rain and the night. John sat, frozen, for a full minute, his breath fogging the inside of the dead car. His mind was a blank canvas. Then, the rational part of his brain, the architect, the planner, rebooted. He'd picked up a mentally unstable woman, possibly on drugs. She'd said some weirdly specific things, a few lucky guesses, and his overtired mind had filled in the blanks, creating a ghost story out of whole cloth. The car's electronics had shorted out in the storm. It was all explainable. He tried the ignition. The engine struggled, then started running. The dashboard lights flickered back to life. Relief, potent and dizzying, washed over him. He laughed, a short, barking sound of sheer nervous release. He put the car in drive and pulled away, anxious to put the whole bizarre episode behind him. He drove for 10 minutes before the comforting lights of a 24-hour gas station appeared through the rain. Pulling in, he felt an almost primal need for human contact, for fluorescent lights and the smell of stale coffee. He shut off the engine and was about to get out when he noticed something odd. The passenger seat. It wasn't just damp, it was utterly saturated, as if a bucket of water had been poured on it. A dark, brackish water that smelled foul, like stagnant pond scum. And on the rubber floor mat, in the puddle that hadn't evaporated, was a thick deposit of dark river mud, tangled with slimy green weeds. And something else entirely. Something small and gleaming wetly in the sickly yellow light of the gas station. John leaned closer. It was a small mother-of-pearl button, intricately carved in the shape of a lily, the kind you might find on a dress from a bygone era. His hand shaking uncontrollably, he pulled out his phone. The signal was weak, but he managed to type Ridge Road accident flood into the search bar. The results were slow to load. His eyes scanned past recent fender benders until one headline from a 30-year-old archived newspaper article made his heart stop. Local woman missing, presumed drowned in flash flood. He clicked on the link. The black and white photo was grainy, but the face was unmistakable. The same translucent skin, the same large, dark, placid eyes. Her name was Lillian Asher. On a stormy night 30 years ago to the day, her car had been swept off Ridge Road and into the swollen creek that fed the reservoir. They found the car days later, wedged against a fallen oak, but her body was never recovered. The article mentioned she was on her way home from her job at the local town hall. The final paragraph was a quote from the heartbroken sheriff. "It's a tragedy. It's as if the water just swallowed her whole." John dropped the phone. A choked sound escaped his lips. He looked at the passenger seat, at the muddy, weed-choked puddle on the floor. The water remembers everything, He finally made it home as the first grey, watery light of dawn was breaking. He stumbled inside, leaving a trail of muddy footprints. He didn't sleep. He sat on his couch, staring at nothing, listening to the rain as it finally softened to a drizzle. He sold the car the following week for a fraction of its value. He couldn't get the smell out. No matter how many times he shampooed the upholstery or left it to air out in the sun, the faint, cloying scent of river mud and death lingered in the passenger seat. The car's electronics never worked right again either. The radio would turn on by itself, always playing white noise or fragments of old, sad songs. John took the long way to work now. It didn't matter. The rain followed him. Sometimes, on stormy nights when the water beat against his window panes, he'd catch a glimpse of a reflection in the glass that wasn't his own. That same face, dark eyes filled with an endless sorrow. And in the dead of night, he would sometimes wake up to the distinct sound of dripping water inside his silent, sealed bedroom. A sound no plumber could ever find. A sound he knew would follow him for the rest of his life. He'd given the rain woman a ride, and, in some small, terrible way, she'd never gotten out of the car.